Good morning. My name is Clay Weeks. I'm pastor here at Salt and Light Church. We're here this morning to talk to you about some things that are near and dear to our hearts, and we just wanted to make you aware of the fact that we are aware of the isolation fatigue that living through this coronavirus can bring on. I'm here at the table with Debbie Sage, who is the hospice and bereavement counselor with the Medicis, with Jason Massey, who is the chaplain at Toomey Hospital. Jason has a lot of experience in mental health in different capacities over the years, different jobs, and our teaching pastor, Rodney Howard. And we wanted to just spend a little bit of time with you this morning to talk about some things. I think it's becoming hard for all of us right now, when especially it's almost like you're a kid and you're in the back seat of the car on a long trip and you're saying, are we there yet? Well, we just don't know. And part of that is what can contribute to our fatigue with this coronavirus that is causing us so much grief right now. The isolation fatigue, life is hard enough and difficult enough in the best of times, and so we're aware of the fact that depression is something. There's going to be mental health repercussions that are going to take a long time to unpack, even after this thing is over. And we're also aware that in our nation and in the world that incidents of suicide is going up. And we have become intimately aware of that within our church community just in the last few days. And so we're primarily talking to our Celebrate Recovery community and our church community. But at the same time, we are aware that this recording might be something that will be helpful for other people. And that's what we want to do, is we want to just take time to say we care. We love you, and so each person's going to talk for a while, and at the end we're going to post this on the Facebook page along with some resources. So we hope this is helpful. I'm going to turn the microphone towards Jason Massey and let Jason talk to you a little bit about not stuffing your feelings at a time like this.
It's tempting when so many things are happening to stuff our feelings, especially if we're giving care to others who may be having a more volatile response or emotional response than we are. I think in the moment sometimes we have to compartmentalize how we feel so that we can attend to what is in front of us, but understand that when we put off processing how we feel, no matter how minor or major, it's like putting spending on a credit card with high interest. Eventually that interest has to be paid, and I hope that we can find time to process our feelings bit by bit. I can remember at the beginning of this thing, one of the feelings I had was, wow, I really enjoyed eating in a restaurant. I'm going to miss that. But also feeling guilty because there are people dying from this pandemic. There are people who have been isolated before the quarantine, and yet having enough grace for myself to say, it's okay for me to say I'm not okay with some of the things that are going on and the way that I'm feeling, and to find voice to that. Yes, things will probably get better. But I think to focus on right now, how do I feel? I give care to caregivers and to patients at the hospital, and there is a tendency to compare our pain with others in an effort to minimize our pain. To say that, well, my pain isn't as significant as someone else's, so I don't have a right to give voice to it. I don't have the resources to devote to that right now. And I want to challenge each of us to be in intentional processing at least once a week, to talk about all the things going on in our lives, to process feeling there are a lot of opportunities with our pastors, with counselors who offer telehealth, with hotlines and other resources we can put you in touch with to talk this out. Please talk it out, I encourage you.
Thanks, Jason. And now we're going to hear from Debbie Sage. And
Good morning, everyone. I had quite a bit to say because certain topics such as depression and suicide are very near and dear to my heart. And so I wanted to not rabbit trail, but I have to write things down. So forgive me if I look away to make sure that I don't forget what I wanted to say. But as Clay said, I work for hospice as a bereavement coordinator, and I deal with death every day. And death is no doubt going to come to us all. But it's the one thing that most people don't want to talk about. Even those grieving don't want to talk about it. And even when their pain is so great. And since this is true, then what about the topic of suicide? And we hear more negative things about it than anything. There's really not much sympathy there when somebody dies by suicide. And that's especially and sad from that we hear this from churchgoers, and that I have experienced myself, and which should appall us all. We hear things like it was just selfish of them to do that. They went straight to hell. They didn't pray enough. They didn't have enough faith. I've heard them all. I want to share some statistical facts about depression and suicide. According to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, suicide claims more lives than war, murder, and natural disasters combined. Just let that sink in. It's the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. A person dies by suicide about every 12 minutes. That's about 129 every day. 90% of all who die by suicide have a diagnosable psychiatric disorder at the time of their death. 25 million Americans suffer from depression each year. More Americans suffer from depression than coronary heart disease, cancer, and HIV/AIDS. And the church is definitely not immune to that. But what about these kind of facts? Depression and suicide affect everyone. We are all touched by it in some way. And in order to heal from the loss of losing someone we love to suicide, we must face it. Talk about it, be educated, and support one another. Ignoring it will not make things all better, and it will not make it go away. In 2013, I experienced the incredible pain of losing my brother Keith to suicide. He suffered with major depression and other mental diagnoses for many years and had first attempted suicide when he was about 13. His emotional pain made his physical pain increase, and then the emotional pain grew until it spiraled out of control. He was on a variety of medications for years, including very strong painkillers. I believe by the time he took his life, his mind was so messed up that he couldn't think straight. A beautiful, smart, kind human being overdosed and died by suicide at the age of 49. He lost his hope. He couldn't get out of the desert, out of that dark place. His mind was so clouded. Several years ago, we were made aware of the opioid epidemic, but those of us who have lost someone to suicide already knew the dangers. I thank God that mental health awareness is being talked about more. It helps me to feel that my brother's death was not in vain. I experienced many of the should've, would've, could've's, but ultimately I could not stop him. I have since learned more about what may have helped, and I'm learning more all the time. When I sought help for my grief, the only help I was offered by a nurse evaluating me was medication. Even though I was telling her what I needed someone to talk to, and finally got it. I saw a counselor and attended a couple of grief support groups, and now I lead grief support groups, which gives me support as well. Our church would greatly heal from the pain of losing our dear family member to suicide if we will just be honest about our feelings and not pretend that it didn't happen. Sometimes there are no words, and I just need your presence. You may need my presence, because sometimes there are no words. We cannot fix each other, but we can support each other. Bring about awareness on the reality of depression and suicide, and know that our church, or any church, is not immune. I believe these are some examples of speaking the truth in love. Genuinely listen to one another. If someone says they're depressed, don't be afraid to ask them if they feel like dying is an answer. When we speak our sad thoughts, it helps to make them lose their power. Don't believe that talking about suicide gives the person the idea to do it. I have a list of resources that will be posted, and you hopefully have all the pastors' numbers. I also have a list of many other resources that can be posted as well. Feel free to contact me about my upcoming grief support group, and I'm available for you to talk to anytime, or to just sit beside you. I want to leave you with these two verses that helped me after Keith's death. Psalm 116:15. Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. And Psalm 34:18. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Thank you.
Now, Rodney is going to speak to us a little bit.
Good morning. And, it'd be easy in some ways not to talk about this, but it's too important. And so I know personally, I can tell you, and to be transparent, I think everybody deals with these kind of thoughts and feelings, but I think some of us more than others, and I have personally. I've dealt with depression myself. I've seen it in my family. It's something that kind of runs in my family, and the whole little mental health and depression type things. Some of it's personality, some of it's genetic, some of it's situational, some of it's spiritual, some of it's physical. There's so many reasons, just a myriad of reasons why we can find ourselves in situations, and especially right now, situationally, we are all vulnerable because we are almost forced to isolate. That's what we're calling it, right? Quarantine or social isolation, social distancing, and that's really what it means. My personality tends to lean itself towards trying to deal with things by either denying or by isolating. And I know better. I know it's not there, but that's my basic default is to do that. And I know it's not good. Thankfully, I've got resources and enough good people around me who reach into my world and pull me out of myself on a regular basis. And I've been fortunate enough to have reasons, by God's grace, to have to get out of myself. And that's a lifesaver so often. I don't often realize that I've been in a place of unhealthy thinking until I do step out of my little isolated world. And then I realize, oh my goodness, this is what I've needed. So I know it's harder now. That's why we're talking about this. I've also experienced, sadly, suicide, both in family and in church members. And it's always extremely difficult to try to come to a place of any kind of rational explanation. There is none for it. But but we have to find a place of some kind of healing. And knowing how difficult that is, we want to be a part of the answer. And, you know, I think oftentimes for us as Christians and Christian leaders, but also just Christians, period, whether it's professional ministry or whether it's just a person who's involved in the church or just a person who's struggling to come to know Christ and to walk with him, I think it's even harder sometimes. There's an extra hurdle to overcome because of some of our the self-imposed shame that, you know, the kind of things you've heard about and that you may have caught yourself thinking, you know, if I was spiritual enough, this wouldn't be happening. And that's just not always the case. Certainly there can be a spiritual component to the reasons behind. Realizing we've really messed up is not a comforting thought, but that's what the hope of the gospel is all about. That's what Jesus came to change. That's why he got involved in our mess. It's so to do something about that, to give us answers for that. But still, because we know that, sometimes it's hard to let ourselves admit that we're struggling. And I hope you don't have to try to do that alone. And also, I think the fact of when we're involved in other people's lives and we're trying to really live out the gospel message, it's not that it sets us up for it, but there's a burden. I think, I feel sure, even as sinlessly as he lived, that Jesus, I know, felt that burden because of the tears that he shed at times. And it wasn't just at the death of a friend, which happened with Lazarus, but also when he looked out across the city he loved and the people it represented and the Jewish people, and looked out across Jerusalem and wept again, as he said that if you only understood what I came to do, to gather you like chicks, like a mother hen gathers her chicks, that he came to gather us under his wing and protect us. And he said, if you were only willing, so we have to be willing. We have to get out of it and admit that we are afraid, that we're as vulnerable as a little chick. That may seem weird. I love animals, and I think naturally of those animal comparisons and metaphors. So, you know, I know what it feels like, and I know that sometimes when we are involved in ministry, we're taking on other people's pain. There's that mindset. I don't know if you saw the movie The Green Mile, but the guy who took on other people's sickness and pain. And I just remember thinking, what a metaphor that is in my life, where I have felt like I needed to, if I took other people's pain, they would be okay. Well, really all it is we're spreading contagion sometimes. You know, they're still hurting and I'm still hurting. And so the answer is not just to take on their pain. That's part of the answer. But then we've got to do something with it, and that is to take it to the Lord. And we want to be a part of helping with that. So especially for those of us who are believers. And if you're not a believer, then finding the hope that's in the gospel is a part of this answer. But also just sometimes we need good counselors. We need people, good doctors and physicians, and there are good ones, many, many good ones out there. And we're thankful for them, especially now. Good counselors like Jason and chaplains at the hospital who know and have resources to point to solutions in this thing and healing. So, you know, Jeremiah 6:14, the Living Bible translation, says you can't heal a wound by pretending it's not there. Sometimes we feel like if we just, time heals all things. Not always. And that, if we don't talk about it, it'll go away. More often than not, it's not going to. It's going to get worse. And we do that with physical sickness and find ourselves in more complicated situations. We do it with spiritual and emotional things especially, and try to stuff it. And I hope you can learn by my admitted mistakes, and some of us who've had to learn the hard way and still find ourselves in dark times, in dark situations. Reach out and be willing to take a hold of some of these resources. I hope you're praying about it, but prayer does heal all things, but prayer is oftentimes linked to real other resources as well. So it in itself may not be your solution. You may not be able to pray your way out of this, but I hope you'll pray that God will show you a handle on His grace. And that may be by making a phone call, by making an appointment, by reaching out, by taking hold of these resources that are going to be posted here, and by contacting one of us. We're not the answer, But we know some people who have some pieces to the puzzle, and we have a few pieces to the puzzle, and if nothing else, if we can be there. And sometimes just a link to someone outside of myself is a beginning to building a bridge. So hopefully we can be a part of that, and we hope that you will not pretend that your pain doesn't exist, that it's not even unimportant. It's there for a reason. Pain can be an incredibly helpful thing if we respond to it in the right way and getting the help that we need. Inner pain, physical pain, and all of that. God gave it to us. Let it be the gift that it is, and to point you to hope and healing. Thank you for listening in, and we look forward to hearing from you if you need this help, and of hearing about what God's doing here. Thank you.